We're glad to have Reverend Charles Lomax, pastor of St. John Missionary Baptist Church and director of community empowerment for the city of Knoxville, with us today. And Reverend Lomax, can you describe a little bit of your work as director of community empowerment for our church family?
Absolutely. So, as Director of Community Empowerment, the work that we do is multifaceted. There are 4 different offices that fall within the umbrella of community empowerment, including the Office of Neighborhood Empowerment, PARC, which is our Police Advisory and Review Committee. We also have the Empower Knox initiative, which was formerly Save Our Sons. And that's a program that we have that's geared toward young men and women who are at risk. And we look to help with violence prevention, workforce development, and a number of other skills that young people need. And then we also have in there our equity and diversity offices, which also deals with Title VI.
So you're dealing with a lot of different issues within the city of Knoxville and demographic and people groups. How does your Christian faith inform the work that you do within the Knoxville community?
So, for me personally, my Christian faith is essential in the work that we do. It informs the work because a lot of the times we find ourselves working with what we might define as the least of these. And so for me, with the work that we're doing, oftentimes it's circled around and centered around the idea of justice. And the Bible says for us, that justice is to be something that we are concerned about, that we are highlighting and pushing forward. And so the work that we're doing, be it with equity, be it with review of police oversight and civilian oversight, be it just within our communities and our neighborhoods of where we live, oftentimes that still centers and circles around this idea of justice, love for neighbors and love for one another, and really just carrying out the mandates that were set for us by God.
Now you mentioned equity, and that's something we hear a lot about, and in theory it's really easy, and in practice it's really hard. So can you describe to us some of that work of equity that takes place locally here in Knoxville and what it looks like?
You're absolutely right. In theory, it is easy. We can easily just, say that all things are equal and things are as they should be. And oftentimes that's not the case. And so when we are looking at, our community, at our city, and I wouldn't try to speak for the county, not working for Knox County, but when we work for the city and looking at that, making sure that there's an equal playing field. And oftentimes, when you peel back the various layers, that's not always the case. And so the work that we're doing and trying to center that is something that we want to make sure is across the board. And so internally with the city, something simple as simple as salaries or promotional opportunities. As we're looking in a broader scale just across the city, ensuring that we have equity in how our communities are being policed, making sure that we have equity and opportunities for our young people. These are some of the things that we are highly concerned with and that we're pushing on a daily basis to make sure we're bringing about a change with.
Now, certainly locally, nationally, recently there's been much more talk about equity in regards to race and the impact of racism within our society. Can you share some of the ways that you see racism still at work in our community that we should all be concerned about?
So let me start off by saying that we have definitely come a long way within our nation, within the practices that we've seen throughout history. And so I'm fortunate enough and blessed enough to stand on the shoulders of those that came before me that paved a way. And so there's no more having to drink from separate fountains or not being able to eat at a restaurant or at a counter or being excluded from things like that. And so the racism that we're seeing now isn't the overt kind of thing that we've seen in years and decades past. But racism is still present and prevalent, even when we don't often see that. And we see some of those inequalities and inequities just even in our neighborhoods. Our neighborhoods aren't very diverse. We see it in funding for institutions and investments. And there are so many ways that it hits close to home and we don't even recognize it. And these are, again, some of the things that we're trying to highlight, because it's not necessarily people who are outright using racial slurs, or wearing the regalia of the Ku Klux Klan or any other organizations as such. But now it's in things that we, again, wouldn't necessarily focus on. Our schools, we see it there. We see it in the fact that representation is not what it should be within our cities, within our organizations, within our companies. Oftentimes we, within our board of directors, don't have a good representation of the city as a whole. We don't see it in our elected officials and in our offices. And it's not that people aren't qualified or that they don't run, but it's just more complicated and difficult for an African American or a person of color to be able to win when you're running citywide or countywide, as opposed to running in a specific district that is heavily occupied by individuals of that same race. And so those are some of the ways that we see it now that we haven't previously seen it.
Now you've really talked about a shift from kind of explicit racism that could be easily identified and in some sense maybe more easily dealt with laws, to more implicit racism.
Exactly.
That when you dig into it, you see it, but if you don't dig in, it's hard to see. And one of the things I've found as a white person is that I've been blind to a lot of things that I looked and I just didn't see, and then people would come and say, well look at this, and I kind of opened my eyes. Is there anything you can share for those of us who are not persons of color, that how we can learn to look at things and not just assume everything is okay because it's okay for us?
Right. So with that, I would say that sometimes we simply have to change our environment. Even as we look at our communities of faith, on Sunday mornings, we pre-pandemic, and now that we're in the pandemic, but we see individuals that look like us, and we don't have a huge variety of individuals, be it race or ethnicity or socioeconomic difference that we really associate and align ourselves with. And so being able to familiarize ourselves with those individuals and being able to hear and see their lived perspective is something that ultimately helps us to have a different lens through which we're looking. Even as we continue to go forward, just reading and educating ourselves, looking at history and not just what was shared with us as we were coming through grade school, but looking beyond that to truly understand how we've gotten to this point and all the things that we've had to come through. I think just education and experience are two of the major factors to how we can really start to take a different perspective and understand the thoughts and the sentiments and the voices of others. And I think I shared this recently with our congregation. It takes each and every one of us pouring into one another in order to really gain perspective. And historically, the ears of white individuals have not been readily available to listen to the voices of black individuals. And so even though it's been shared that this is an issue or this is the experience, it hadn't really been readily received. And there are those that have gone above and beyond within the white community that have heard, that have understood, that have made strides to really be allies and to help along the way. But I think that those that have reached that point within white communities have to help us from black communities to share that with those that are in your circles, to really be able to get that message across.
You began by talking about how far we've come, and not just being overwhelmed by how far we have to go. Right now, what are some of the bright spots you see in this work and people coming together in progress towards equity being made? within Knoxville, what gets you out of bed in the morning and gets you excited about what you get to do that day?
Well, some of the bright spots, I believe, are that people are actually listening and paying attention now. A lot of that has to do just with modern technology and social media and the likes. And so things are being recorded, things are being viewed. And, it's one thing to hear about something, it's something completely different to see it. And so when you're able to see a situation like George Floyd, where the officer's knee was on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, that registers and resonates with you as opposed to just hearing about it or reading about it. And so the bright spot that I'm seeing is that we have a number of people who are now saying, you know what, I see it, I get it, and are even saying, what can I do to help? Or, where are some strides that we can take, or what are some strides that we can take in order to help in this work of equity and equality? And so, even situations like this where we're able to have a conversation with one another speaks volumes to where we are. And those are the things that give me hope. Those are the bright lights. And those are the things that get me out of the bed every day, because we're at a point now where we're able to seriously have dialogue, even in those difficult conversations, to come to a consensus and to say, you know what, I may not even fully agree with what you're saying, but at least we're at a point where we can listen and interact and dialogue and walk away as brothers and sisters, still having our faith that binds and unites us together.
Now, I know one of the things that's really on your heart within the Knoxville community is young people.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned a program called Save Our Sons, and I think that's now developed into even a more diverse outreach. Can you share with us a little bit about that program?
Absolutely. So I started working for the city in December of 2019, and when I came on board with the new administration, I took over a department that was previously called Community Relations. And so with the new administration, we began to identify it as Community Empowerment. And with that, we also inherited a program that was called Save Our Sons. And Save Our Sons was focused on young African American men 14 to 24 years of age. And we noticed a trend here that we saw nationally as well. And at the time, Chief David Roush, working along with Mayor Rogero and a number of other individuals, began to kind of identify some of the needs that were present in our community. And so from that, ultimately, Save Our Sons was born. And it's a partnership and a collaboration that we have with an organization called Cities United, which is out of Louisville, Kentucky. And working with them, we began to put together a roadmap for how to progress forward in making sure that we were making an impact in the lives of these young men. And so at the point that we have a new administration and a new vision, we wanted to be more inclusive in the work that we were doing. And so we ended up going from just African American males to males and females to be inclusive in that sense. We wanted to lower the age also, because by the time we were getting to 14-year-olds, a lot of things were already ingrained, and in some cases we had already missed the boat. And so we wanted to make sure that we lowered the age to be able to reach them at an earlier stage. And then we wanted to look just beyond African Americans and do at-risk youth in general. And so the space is now more broad for us to be able to have a greater impact. And really, the aim is the same thing. We're focused on civic engagement. We're focused on workforce development. We're focused on education. And we're also focused on mental health and trauma, because that's something that a lot of our kids are having to endure through a number of things that they experience at home, or peer pressure, or substance abuse, a number of different things. And so those are some of the areas in which we're focusing and really bringing community partners together throughout the city and the county to pour into our young people and to make sure that they have all of the tools that they need in order to be successful going forward.
And how do you facilitate that, getting those folks to pour into our young people? Because I know that, and what do you find that our young people really need? I know one of the easiest things to do with young people is, cajole them into sitting in a room while you lecture and try to download information to them. And that,
Right.
that doesn't always have the best impact. So what do you find really makes that difference in the impact with the young people who are at risk in our community?
So we have what we call the Mayor's Roundtable of youth serving organizations, and we have about 50 to 60 community partners that are a part of this, ranging from some of our larger youth serving organizations that everyone are perhaps familiar with, to those that are very grassroots that you've probably never even heard of. And beyond that, we have partners through the Knoxville Police Department, the University of Tennessee, the Metro Drug Coalition. I mean, it's just a wide array of individuals that come together. And with the different skills and focal points that we bring together to the table, we're able to look at those 4 categories that I shared previously and kind of see where they fit in and begin to share ideas back and forth with one another, that they're not working just within their individual silos, but that they're working in collaboration, one with the other. And that's something that we're extremely passionate about, is making sure that we're not reinventing the wheel, that we have collaboration among our organizations, and that you don't have 2 entities that are trying to do the exact same thing and really not having the greatest amount of impact that they could if they were working together. Another thing that we're really excited about is that we're in the process of forming a youth council. And so it's not just, them coming together for us to share with them or to lecture them, but we want to hear from them. And so it's our hope that we will be able to assemble a wide spectrum of youth from across the city of Knoxville. And we're not just looking for those that are high performing, but we're also looking for those that are high potential as well. The high performing students are often the ones that are able to get all of the support and the help, and they get all of the scholarships, and that's wonderful, and we want to applaud and support them in those efforts. But at the same time, there are a lot of young men and women, young adults that have great potential, and they really just haven't had that tapped into. And so we're looking for both the high performing as well as the high potential. And we want to hear from them. We want their thoughts, their ideas, and to help us to shape policy that ultimately will affect them and those that come after them.
And you mentioned as part of your partnership with the initiative with the young people is working with the police.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you also work with them on issues of policing policy and if there's an instance of police brutality. Can you tell us a little bit about how that policing policy aspect takes place within Knoxville?
Absolutely. So we have brave men and women that serve our community through law enforcement, and we're grateful for their service. And one of the things that we took note of, and this was 20 years ago when the Police Advisory Review Committee was established, is that even though we have stellar men and women that serve this community, there are times when we have complaints against those men and women, and individuals feel as though their rights in some form or fashion may have been violated. And so we have a civilian oversight board that investigates when citizens raise concern or complaint regarding an interaction with police enforcement within the city of Knoxville. In addition to that, we also review all of the internal affairs unit's investigations as well, and we will give report of that and make recommendations to the chief of police and to all of her staff as far as whether or not we feel that was worthy of what the resolution was or what the findings were. And oftentimes with that, we'll also make recommendations as to if we think something additional should be done. And so it's important that we have something in place as such, because again, it gives voice to and empowers the community to say that just because this person is carrying out this duty to protect and serve doesn't mean that they always get it right. And so we want to have something in place that allows us to be able to look at and make sure that they are carrying out their duties to the best of their ability and to the standards that are a part of the department for the city of Knoxville.
Have you seen progress in that over the years as you've been on the committee?
Well, absolutely. I personally have not served on that committee. That is again a 7-person panel that is selected by the mayor and approved by city council. And those individuals serve. It's a volunteer opportunity. They don't get paid, and so we're grateful for their service as well. And in their terms, they see a number of different cases ranging from a number of different complaints, some of which are extremely valid and have been reason for concern. Others not so much, and that's their job to evaluate that and to make sure that the proper renderings are coming forth. And so we've seen great progress in that. We see a number of different cases that come through on an annual basis, and I unfortunately don't have any of the numbers with me, but annually we see a significant amount of complaints that come through from various communities within the city of Knoxville that address issues concerning the conduct of some of our officers.
Now, I imagine your work in community development has the potential, maybe even in the same day, to be exhilarating and exhausting, inspiring and infuriating. And I would just have to imagine that to continue strongly in that work, you have to have a deep sense of passion for it. In your life, where's that passion come from?
Well, for me, that passion comes from, I guess, just things that were instilled in me as a child through my family, my mom, my dad, just in making sure that every voice is heard, making sure that everyone is being loved on in some form or fashion. I think that is ultimately kind of what pushes and what drives me, is to make sure that regardless of who you are or where you come from, that you have someone in your corner who's cheering for you or that's fighting for you. And there are days when it can be extremely exhausting and extremely exhilarating, often in the same moments. And so what really pushes me and empowers me as we attempt to empower others is the idea of making tomorrow better than today, and really making sure that we as a community, we as neighborhoods, we as a city are striving to be a place that would be open and welcoming for everyone regardless of ethnicity or gender or sexual orientation. We want this city to be a city that is welcoming and inclusive, and not just a pass-through for students at the University of Tennessee to come and get a degree and then go off elsewhere. And so really making sure that this is a place where people are comfortable is what drives me.
Growing up for me, my plan at 12 years old was to be a professional baseball player. That was plan A. Plan B was to have a plan B. I was working on that. When did you first realize that you might like to do this kind of work?
Well, plan A for me was to be a professional basketball player. That was plan A. My height did not agree with that or support that. I think for me, it was right around 1999 or 2000. I was a senior in high school at the time, and I ended up taking my first government class and really getting into the idea or the thought of that. And I was intrigued by it and just kind of the history that we had as a country and as a city, and being involved and engaged. That was just spoke wonders to me. And so when I went to the University of Tennessee, I went in as a political science major, and I had my mind made up that I was ultimately going to go to law school and maybe one day run for office. And as it happened, God kind of had other plans. And so my freshman year is when I really started wrestling with this idea of ministry and a calling to ministry and to preach. And at the age of 18, I ended up preaching my initial sermon at Tabernacle Baptist Church, and that kind of got me involved in the work of ministry. And so ultimately there was a fusion of the two, and I began to kind of have this passion and this desire for church and for the people of God. But on the other hand, I started to have this passion and this desire for society and for government, and ended up changing my major from political science, moved that to a minor, and majored in sociology and just the study of people and society. And it was an amazing fusion for me to really have those two. And that's been something that I've been extremely passionate about since about the age of 17 or 18.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear you talk about kind of, Jesus' two greatest commandments, love God and your neighbor. And it seems like God was really getting at that with you and his work in your life. Just one final question. I think this has been a very unsettling time for many folks in our country, and particularly what we saw happen a week and a half ago at the White House, or excuse me, at the United States Capitol. As you saw all this unfolding on a national stage, what was your personal just reaction and perspective, and how would you speak to the church in a time like this?
So my personal reaction to the events that we witnessed over the past week or so was hurt, confusion, anger, a number of different emotions all balled up into one. I preached a sermon last week that kind of dealt with it. Even as I was wrestling and unfolding, I was reading through my Bible and came across Acts chapter 2. And in that, Paul is arrested by the Roman guards, and the centurion has him and is getting ready to flog him because of some of the unrest that he created in Jerusalem at the point that he had returned. And as he's getting ready to be flogged, he says to the centurion, "Is it legal to beat a Roman citizen?" And from that, they end up letting Paul go. He has a conversation with the captain and says to the commander, you bought your citizenship, but mine was from birth. And that right there began to highlight some things for me. And the title of the sermon was The Power of Privilege, and the fact that Paul's privilege was connected to his citizenship. Had he not been a Roman citizen, he would not have been able to avert the adversity that had come his way. And by him being able to claim citizenship, he was able to have a conversation with them, and he was able to avoid the beating and the flogging that came his way. And just reflecting on the images that I saw that all of us witnessed of individuals pushing their way into the Capitol and going into restricted areas and all of the other things that we've witnessed, it highlighted for me that the majority of the individuals in this crowd were white Americans. And the initial thought that I had was that people of color would not have been able to do that and to, in that moment, get away with it and to return back home. And it kind of struck some chords with me as far as that's one of the areas of difference, and just kind of that idea that certain individuals within our society and within our communities have privilege while others do not. And so just looking back over the history of our country in 1619, when the first ships landed in Jamestown, those that were on those ships were not seen as citizens. When you look at the Three-Fifths Compromise, when we were dealing with some of the ideas of whether or not black people should be counted for their votes, and we were ended up being counted as 3/5 of a person, again, not seen as full citizens. When we're looking at some of the various amendments that came through, the 14th, 15th, 13th Amendment, these are things where on paper one thing is being said, but in practice something else is being done. And so again, not really being seen as full citizens. And it's not until around 1965 that legally and somewhat in practice we really began to have that idea of citizenship embraced. And so going back to Paul and just the idea of my privilege being tied to my citizenship, when you have a segment of the population that's not really seen as full citizens or even as people, that's one of those areas where privilege is lacking. And so for me, it was a moment of extreme hurt just to be able to see that and to know that if the situations were reversed or if the shoe were on the other foot, that's probably not something that would have been able to happen or to transpire.
Well, we're so grateful for your time with us today. We're so grateful for your work in the Knoxville community, and we wish you all the best, and we hope our paths will cross again soon, and that they'll cross at a time when we can connect in person rather than online and on video. But Reverend Charles Lomax, thank you so much for joining us here at Concord United during this time.
It was my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you so much. And I look forward to that time where we can, in person, fellowship and be able to have these conversations. And I'm really grateful and appreciative. Thank you.